Top business leaders talk about the state budget and business climate in Pennsylvania. Next on Behind the Headlines.
This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, welcome to a new edition of Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenewald, Senior Fellow of the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy, and I'm joined as usual by my co-host Maura Donnelly. Welcome, Maura.
Hello, Charlie.
Why, Maura, there's been some events worth noting. On a sad note, Al Neary,
Yes.
one of the best reporters here in Harrisburg,
a good
has
man.
passed.
Yes.
Our best wishes and our condolences go to him and his family. We find that on an interesting note, the Patriot News did a study the other week that found that over 3,600 state employees earn more than $100,000 a year.
True.
I think you and perhaps both of us left
Prematurely.
state employment too soon.
Yes.
Yes. Well, someone who knows a lot about salaries, someone who knows a lot about the business climate is going to be our guest for this first segment of Behind the Headlines, and that's Scott Wagner. Scott, welcome to the show.
Sure.
Scott, of course, is the owner, the president and CEO of Penn Waste, and has been with us before to talk about the business climate and has given us good insights into the business world and the business climate. What do you think about that? 3,600 state employees earn more than $100,000 a year. Had you any idea it was that many?
I knew it was a large number, but I have a calculator that I carry in my car, and I think it goes to the error when you multiply 3,600 times 100,000. It's a lot of money. And recently the Patriot had an article about what the top people in the education system make, the chancellor and down through the ranks, and the chancellor. John Kavanaugh made $327,500, and that's in the public sector.
Mm-hmm. More than the governor.
More than the governor, and when you get into the private sector, this is a lot of money, and $327,500 buys a very, very sharp executive in private industry, and you won't find a lot of these. So it is very interesting, and I think also, I would be interested in knowing what pension numbers are, what other benefit numbers are. This 327.5 could be worth $400, $450 a year, and it continues to add up, and it's the runaway train that Pennsylvania is on financially that just continues.
Well, we find that Chief Executive Magazine did a new survey of business conditions among all 50 states, and Pennsylvania has slipped from 27th to 39th. Was that pretty much in line with what you are seeing out there and what you and the business leaders of the Commonwealth are believing?
Yeah, I think it is, and let me just a little bit about my business. We were recently at the York Business Expo held at the York Fairgrounds in York, and there was a reporter who did a quick story, and he was excited because he said, "This is the Business Expo. It looks like businesses are doing well, and the economy's growing." But what he didn't report was there were only about 70 exhibitors, and 10 years ago there were 300, 350.
Oh my.
It's dropped dramatically. And my business is growing, and this is what's happening to some businesses. My business is growing because we're a well-run company, and we're picking on the competition. Our market really isn't growing, but we're growing because we're better on customer service. We're better on just many aspects of our business. And there are companies in Pennsylvania that are doing better because they do things better than others. But that doesn't mean that the economy's growing, and there's a lot more business out there. I mean, it's the sharp. This is a time where sharp, well-run companies will prosper and grow, and well-run or not well-run companies will have problems and will not be able to grow. But something happened when we had the recession 3 years ago. A local banker from York told me that, who has a lot of business clients, told me that to survive the recession, a lot of businesses made tough decisions, and they had to lay off 20% of their workforce to survive. And so the other 80% that was left had to pick up the ball and had to make things work. And something surprisingly happened, that businesses started, the businesses started turning around with 20% less people. They become prosperous. And it was really, it almost proves the theory out. There's something I call the 80-20 rule, that 80% of the people were doing 100% of the work. Mm-hmm. And that really has shown through in a lot of businesses where, businesses had to make tough decisions, and they laid off people that they had to do. It was a tough decision to survive. But surprisingly, the businesses are now doing well, and those businesses are not bringing back those 20% of the workforce that was laid off. So I think everybody in Pennsylvania is challenged running a business, to become more efficient. But again, one of the things that, here we are, today's May 17th, and the election was held approximately 6 months ago, and from my perspective, and I've been on your show numerous times, really not a lot has changed. We haven't seen a right to work bill. We haven't seen any workers' comp legislation. The tort reform bill is now, is out there, but it's not passing. And it appears that, the Senate and the House and the governor are not all on the same page.
Despite the fact they're all controlled by the same party.
Exactly, yeah. Exactly.
Well, they say that the governor runs the largest corporation in the state. He is the chief executive officer of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. He's come out with some pretty dramatic changes for the budget in this coming season. But we still have 2/3 of Pennsylvanians are opposed to the cuts that he's proposing in education. If you were to give him a little bit of advice, would you tell him to stick to his guns on these dramatic cuts that he's making across the board? Education's hit the worst, but everybody's getting hit.
Yes, I believe that Governor Corbett needs to stick to his plan, and without offending people. I've been to Harrisburg probably a half a dozen times in the last 2 months, and every time I walk into the Capitol, there are people protesting, and honestly, they're all union workers. And the largest group that is whining right now are the teachers. The teacher unions. Mm-hmm. And we're in trouble. School districts are in trouble, and I think I believe that we're back to it's the 80-20 rule. I believe that 80% of the teachers are excellent teachers, and there are some teachers that are not good teachers.
You ready for the letters you're going to get now?
Yeah. So, but I think, Governor Corbett, trust me, in the business community, and I also, as a taxpayer, let's set aside I'm a business owner, but I'm also a taxpayer. I pay taxes in my school district, and I pay taxes just like everybody else. I, put fuel in my car, I pay license fees, do everything, just as we all do in this room. And I think that, Governor Corbett, at the end of the day, has a tremendous amount of support out there. But everybody, we're all hearing the whining. Honestly, is coming from the teachers and the teacher unions. And I think when you start looking at what people are being paid in the higher area of the education system, I think it deserves some questioning. So I'm fully supportive of Governor Corbett and his initiatives that he has to bring out and present to everyone. Remember, we've been talking about this. Pennsylvania is on this Titanic path. Nothing's really changed, and what about all the workers' welfare fraud that was identified by the Auditor General last year? Mm-hmm. Nobody is willing to take the medicine, and I think the governor has to really, continue to be out there. We support him, in the business community, and I believe, again, if you really look, the number of union workers in this country, I think, are just a shade under 12%. Well, that means that 88% of the workers in this country are non-union, and union workers are enjoying. You just mentioned the 3,600 employees employed by the state or the education system making $100,000. They're unionized. What about
many of them aren't? Many of them are at-will employees working for the state legislature, Scott. And the state legislature, their salaries perhaps and their costs perhaps are just spiraling out of control, and there are no market forces over there.
Correct.
to control those.
Well, and I think, you know, you also have, I mean, let's face it, the business of Harrisburg has grown dramatically. It's grown year after year after year in its government, and it's grown. And, you know, has government had a 25 or 50% growth in the last 10 years? I think it's probably had 25%. That's a heck of a growth business. And again, but where do the revenues come from? The revenues come from taxes and, you know, continuing to, you know, expand taxes. I mean, it's when I purchased for example, I purchased a garbage truck in the year 2000. That garbage truck was $125,000. Today, that same garbage truck is $225,000, $100,000 more. So you have to understand, when I purchased that truck for $125,000 versus $225,000, at either level, 6% sales tax was applied and 12% federal excise tax. So if you back out 18% of 125 and you back out 18% of 225, you know, sales tax revenues are going up. And every truck in America pays federal excise tax. And virtually every truck in the state of Pennsylvania pays sales tax. And as the value of the base values of, or the base purchase prices of those pieces of equipment increase, the state just is continuing to, they're getting, you know, really, if you look at it, they're getting about 3.5% to 4.5% increase in sales tax revenues because the base costs of certain items purchased are going up. Look at cars. I mean, the price of cars, you know, have gone up, you know, 25 to 30% in the last 10 years.
Well, for the first time in 3 years, the state has a surplus. So that generated a lot of discussion on what should happen with it. And just be curious what you think, you know, the state ought to do. Put it, bank it, spend it?
Yeah, they said that essentially tax revenues were 100% over projections.
Right.
The governor should continue on his path. You know, it's interesting how this, I mean, we've changed the administration in Harrisburg. You know, we had, you know, Governor Rendell for 8 years, and, you know, we went from Governor Rendell to Governor Corbett, and obviously, you know, the state is a massive, massive business to operate. And honestly, it would, you know, I think the governor has had his hands full with his team probably understanding the financial statement of the state of Pennsylvania, understanding the budget. It is a massive, massive project. But back to your question, that should be banked. It should not be spent. We have to get ready for the next, you know, the next downturn.
2012 is not going to be any better, from what I understand. So,
you know, there are a lot of factors, and you know, if we have, okay, so if we have the money, where is this excess money, and where was it generated, and what are we're talking about jobs, and I can tell you, Pennsylvania has a very, very bad road infrastructure. I mean, we have a lot of old infrastructure. So if we have excess money, then yeah, I believe, yes, it should be invested wisely, but just to go out and spend it, right, you know, and give back to the school districts where honestly, a lot of these school districts haven't pulled in, and reality has not set into operating lean. I mean, you still continue to see, you know, these large, massive schools being built, and you know, nobody is really willing to make any cuts. But I also think that if we're going to spend this money, and I want to, you know, really be clear on this, I believe we need to deal with prevailing wage. If we have excess money, let's take that money, let's deal with prevailing wage, and let's go out and rebuild a lot of the infrastructure with cheaper dollars, because we're not paying these crazy wages. And you know what? We maybe can get 30 to 40% more of the infrastructure rebuilt. But again, well, you know, that's going to become, you know what, my fear is that prevailing wage is just going to become a conversation that is a thing of the past. And I don't really think that, you know, my honest opinion, again, I'll take bullets for this, but the legislature needs to provide some leadership. You know, the State House, they need to provide leadership. The Senate needs to provide leadership. And I think, you know, with the combination of the two, you know, government bodies and the governor, we could have probably one of the most prosperous 4 years that we've had in a long time. But, you know, it's bickering. It's little turf wars. Everybody's, you know, the teachers are concerned about this, and then, you know, we were discussing earlier about the liquor stores. I think the liquor stores should be sold. I think it should happen fast. It's been talked about for years and years.
Yes.
And again, the liquor store is the 80-20 rule. In fact, it might even be, I think it's worse than that. It's probably 50-50. If 50% of the people in the liquor stores, and most of the liquor store employees are unionized, but there's a liquor store in York. I walk in and there is a lady in the liquor store. She knows all about every wine, and she takes you right to the section, has incredible customer service, and you know what? She would be a great candidate to own a wine store someday if it was privatized, because she really knows her product. But then I've been to other stores, and you know, you go and you ask the person at the cash register, like, you know, can you tell me? And it's like grunt, grunt, no, I don't know, and point over there. And I mean, the time has come that, trust me, private industry can run these liquor stores a lot better. And at the end of the day, it's going to be a lot less of burden on the state, because it's just one more thing they have to manage.
They'll have a better selection and better hours.
Correct.
Probably
Correct.
as well. More product. Well, we want to thank you very much for being with us again. The time always goes way too fast, because I know we've just started. We're just scratching the surface, and we certainly know it seems that the governor's team has just gotten there. They're slowly assembling and learning of the lay of the land, and it does take a long time for it to move a ship back on to a different course, for sure. And we appreciate you sharing those thoughts with us, Scott. We'll be back with the second segment of Behind the Headlines right after this.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Pennsylvania Business Council, envisioning a commonwealth in which residents enjoy a very high quality of life in sustainable communities. The Council works aggressively to define key long-term policy strategies and solutions that make the Commonwealth more competitive, creating and sustaining a better Pennsylvania. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by Daily Express, transporting construction, farm, and industrial equipment throughout the United States. And by Penn Waste, your best local choice for your waste removal and recycling needs.
Welcome back to the second segment of Behind the Headlines. On this segment, Mara and I have another important person in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania in regard to business and business climate. And this, of course, has been a guest that we've had in the past, and we're very fortunate to have his counsel and be able to pick your brain. Dave Patti, who's the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Business Council.
Thanks,
Welcome to the show,
Sure,
Dave.
thanks.
We're so happy to have you.
Hey, Dave.
I guess you heard from our earlier segment this ranking by Chief Executive Magazine that bumped Pennsylvania down from 27th to 39th among the states in terms of business climate. I don't know, is this a ranking that your organization pays attention to or uses?
Well, actually, what we've done over the last few years is tried to look at all these surveys. Because it's important to get into the details of what are they grading us on. Frankly, there are different philosophical assumptions. Some people will give you a lower grade if you stop giving the handouts, the corporate welfare. Others of us might think that's a good thing. So I mean, you really have to get into some of the weeds with it. But what we've done in looking at 6, 8, 10 studies, and comparing them across the years, is found that regardless of where you come from, when you kind of put it all together, we're a C state. We're in the middle. We are not the worst, but we are never the best, and that's frustrating, because Pennsylvania certainly has the potential to be the best.
Well, over the years, though, have we actually improved? I mean, I think there have been times when we've kind of
it goes up and down.
I mean, up a little bit.
Yes, but again, I mean, these rankings are dangerous in that they are blended rates of different factors. There are things that Pennsylvania is very good at, and we should be proud of those things, and we should keep those attributes. Very good in education, pretty good in workforce development, although there's some work to be done there. Great in quality of life attributes. On the other hand, not surprisingly, always ranked fairly low in terms of our infrastructure, our business tax climate, our legal climate. Other elements, kind of fall in the middle. So energy. Energy availability and affordability has been getting better. So any of these indices that heavily weight energy and natural resources, Pennsylvania continues to get better because of the Marcellus Shale. So there are lots of things that are good about doing business in Pennsylvania, but there are certainly things that can be improved. And what I'd like to do is keep the good and do the improvements.
Okay. The budget. This year's budget is a little different. Of course, Governor Rendell never had a budget that was approved on time, and now we have an all-Republican team in Harrisburg, and there was an anticipation that the budget will be on time, maybe early. What do you know about new budget developments at this point?
Well, I mean, I do think it's a little easier when both sides of the legislature are dominated by the same political party, but that doesn't mean it's a slam dunk. There are still philosophical differences within parties, whether it be within the Republican Party or the Democratic Party.
On some of the biggest issues.
Sure, East versus West has different perspectives, urban versus rural. So there are some issues here. I think the Republicans were surprised that the Corbett budget proposal did not make cuts to Medicare, Medicaid rather, I'm sorry, Medicare being a federal program, but Medicaid, welfare programs. And so what we've seen in recent weeks is them making a move to cut, frankly, on a percentage basis, modest amount, 4%. But because we spend about $11 billion in those program areas, that amounts to almost $500 million. So reallocating
some of that
money,
over to
shifting back to K through 12
right.
education, through higher education, to private universities as well. And so you saw some differences there between them and the governor. There's some discussions between the House and Senate as the House has now teed up the bill for final passage there and sending it to the Senate, where the Senate Republicans, some of them anyway, have suggested, well, if we're going to have a surplus this year, maybe we spend down part of that surplus. House Republicans have said absolutely not. They have agreed with the governor. Let's stick to just spending what we have. We don't know what next year is going to bring. Some of the surplus they believe is a one-time happenstance that we may not see that money again next year as a recurring revenue. Yes, we think the economy is getting better, but it's still a little shaky on the employment front. And then the Senate Republicans, in fact, counter on some of the welfare-related cuts are predicated on finding fraud and abuse and getting rid of it. And so the House has proposed spending less money, allocating less money for those programs, in the belief that we will be able to cut that spending. Some of the Senate leaders have said, well, we're all for that if you really find it, but what we'd hate to find out is it takes us 6 months to try and implement that program. We don't find as many savings as we think, or it's going to take years to achieve the savings. And we're coming back for a supplemental appropriation next spring. So I think there are very good, both philosophical and technical questions on both sides of the building, and with the administration that are not delaying the process, but making it be the deliberative process it should.
Mm-hmm. Well, what do you know about? Do you have any knowledge or information? Are the caucuses, is the governor's office working with the Auditor General's office to try to pick up on the Auditor General's findings of welfare system abuse and to try to correct them and save that money?
You're right. I mean, Auditor General Jack Wagner is the one who first brought this to everyone's attention with an audit done more than a year ago. And in fact, through the 2010 campaign, I think his name was invoked more than anybody else's by Republicans or Democrats as look at the things that Jack Wagner has shown us. Mm-hmm. So legislative leaders and their team, as well as the corporate administration and their new folks in the Department of Public Welfare, are looking at that report, are meeting with auditors, have gotten that kind of advice for tips of where to look. But finding general error rates and mistakes, which were of course disputed by the Rendell administration, and then trying to implement, well, how do you actually do it differently, and get that process to change. I mean, changing
and then realize the
course of a bureaucracy of that size will take some time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. As Morris says, until you actually achieve the savings. There's nobody who doesn't believe, myself included, that those savings are there to be achieved.
But could it impact this next budget season? Right. It's going to be tough.
And not surprisingly, Democrats are going to be defensive. I mean, their best political tactic, and the constituencies that they represent in the urban areas, are to fight against some of the cuts, whether it be in education or in welfare. And so they're doing that and raising questions, raising legitimate policy questions about education cuts or other cuts. So I mean, there are a lot of dynamics at work, which is what democracy was supposed to be about. So I think we're on track, though, for a budget that's done before June 30th, probably well before June 30th, and won't make anybody completely happy, but won't destroy things for anybody either.
Well, it doesn't seem that we can get through any news day these days without something about Marcellus Shale. And it's become one of the hot button issues for the budget. Should there be a user fee? Should there be a tax? There are new bills there are probably about 6 or 7 pieces of legislation that have been introduced. What's your prediction on what's going to happen with Marcellus Shale?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, and actually, I think there are a couple of issues, 3 or 4 issues that are going to be hanging out there. Probably, in fact, don't get done before the budget. So that have a fiscal impact. Marcellus Shale being one, but the school vouchers,
yes.
the EITCs.
That one seems to have stalled a little bit.
Well, I was going to say, I think a lot of these things will hang around. I don't think
yeah.
I'd be very surprised to see Marcellus Shale happen
Resolved.
before June 30th.
Okay.
It's an interesting case where the governor has said absolutely positively no way, no how will there be a tax. Some within the industry would have conceded a tax in return for some other understanding of public policy in several years ago. Mm-hmm. And I think, now this is sort of the economist to me says, it's a standard practice in economics and public policy to talk about social cost and social benefits and who bears the cost and how do you compensate for the cost. And most of the Marcellus industry has said, look, we understand there's an impact on roads
right.
and bridges or water, and we're willing to pay for that. What they've been doing is essentially one-off contracts, township by township, where they do drilling. And frankly, some of the townships have very much benefited
right.
from that. What happened a few weeks ago is that Senator Scarnati, President pro tem, leader of the Senate, came out with an impact fee, where right. he said, look, this is that economic concept of redressing social cost, and that those who have imposed the cost on society will pay for them. Now, how you do that is difficult, and so essentially his fee looks like
yes.
a tax
yes.
to anybody else. I mean, it's based on the output from the wells
yeah.
and
yet
the wellhead price.
Said to come out in support of impact fees.
Well, I think the main difference between the current proposal and the former proposals, the semantics aside, is that it's driven by putting revenue in the hands of the local governments that are bearing the impact, the communities that are bearing the impact, not the Pennsylvania General Fund as a way to just make a profit for the state. And I think that's the hallmark of the difference. But the Senate Republicans, while they seem to be okay with that conceptually, House Republicans less so. Democrats kind of on both sides. I mean, some of the Democrats, it's not so much that they're opposed to an impact fee, they'd like to see more go to the state in some cases, although some are okay with this concept. So it's just not one of those things I think gets done in the next 2 weeks or so.
And school vouchers is pretty much the same way. There's even disagreement or differences of how it should be approached within it. So
difference about the mechanics within the Senate, and then the House that says, look, let's just increase the amount of the education tax credit that businesses are given if they make a donation to nonprofits and to schools, and we'll let the market kind of sort out where people go.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for being with us again,
Great
Dave.
to be with you.
We'll check and see how these predictions bear out, and we'll have you back here when the budget is finally addressed and tied up in a nice bow. We want to thank you for being with us for another edition of Behind the Headlines. Again, you can see us on YouTube, and you can see all of our shows archived on Voice of PA. Check out our website at Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy, and we'll see you again next week on Behind the Headlines.